Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Hocking Hills Moonshine. We're going to do a couple different things today. We're going to talk about a little bit about the history of moonshine in this area. So what I'm standing in front of here is we call the photo shoot. So a lot of groups and couples like to come in here, have their picture taken in front of this. This is an authentic 100-year-old copper pot homemade moonshine still. And this still was located in this old saloon right here in my hometown of New Straitsville, Ohio. New Straitsville, Ohio was known as the moonshine capital of the world. More about that later. This building here was built in the 1880s, lasted for over 100 years until it burned down in the 1990s. And one of the last families to own it brought us this picture of it, and they found an old liquor license from 1953, and this was Betty St. Clair. She was a distant relative of mine. She was an owner, longtime owner of Matthew's Cafe. So the story behind this still was during Prohibition, which most of us know started in 1920, ended 1933, you couldn't manufacture liquor. So this homemade pot still was inside of that building. That's how they produced their liquor. That's how they stayed in business. So after Prohibition ended, this was passed down from ownership to ownership to ownership until it wound up with me, and now it's here on display so everybody can see it and enjoy it. So you notice the size of this. This is about the right common size of the period. This is probably about a 10 to 15 gallon copper pot still. Copper was the preferred method in the old days. It was easy to work with, it was lightweight, and most towns had a coppersmith that could work with the material. You notice this has a beautiful cape on it. It has a little spout. This is called the cap. So the cap comes off, all of your mash water goes inside, and it just had a little homemade water valve here. That's how it was drained. Put the cap back on, seal it up, fire up the wood. You're going to start cooking product. As you can see, it's a pretty simple setup. Now, this cone actually goes down, which I'll explain later. So all your liquor flows down into your coil here, and then it goes into the cooling barrel. When it comes down at the bottom, out comes your product. Pretty crude, pretty simple setup, but very effective. So you notice a lot of items here. First off, the backdrop. This is a 150-year-old barnwood. Came from our family farm right here in the Hocking Hills, a little place known called Webb Summit. Families lived there since 1907. This was our clubhouse. This would have been a square building. This was our clubhouse when we were kids. So me and my brother and my cousins all played in this building. Set on a sandstone foundation, so you can see down there at the bottom how weathered that is. 150 years. So this was leaning, it was getting ready to fall over, and my dad was just going to knock it over with the tractor because he has no understanding of history. So we went out to the farm and salvaged what we can. So this made a nice backdrop. On the walls, a lot of our farm implements, things we found just laying around the barnyard or the farm, including my grandfather's license plates. We got some old saws, we got some old foot tracks. These are called cow kickers. For those of you who don't know what those are, those would have went on the cow when you were milking it so it wouldn't kick you, because the St. Clairs were dairy farmers. 2 generations of dairy farmers all the way up into the 1970s before my grandfather sold off his herd. This pot still right here was confiscated by the Perry County Sheriff's Office all the way back in the 1970s. This guy was in operation. He was a notorious bootlegger. He was in a place called Old Town, which is just outside of New Straitsville. They come in and raided this, and they took all of his equipment, and this wound up in the basement of the sheriff's office, and you can see by its condition, it's been thrown around and beat up a little bit. There's actually axe holes in that copper pot still. So from the Sheriff's Department, this was donated to the New Straitsville Moonshine Festival Committee, which I'm a member, and now it's here on display at Hocking Hills Moonshine. People just love this old stuff, the connection to history. So next we're going to talk about the town of New Straitsville. So what you see here, we have a nice little train set display with some other items included. We like to talk about the history of New Straitsville. New Straitsville, Ohio, in southern Perry County, during the Prohibition time and thereafter, was always known as the moonshine capital of the world. Now the story goes that so much liquor was produced in this little community and it got shipped up north that it became very famous in some of the more popular cities of the time, such as Chicago and New York. So how did that happen exactly? Well, first let's take a look at the town. Here you see a picture of New Straitsville about 1915. Unfortunately, most of those buildings are gone due to a series of fires shortly thereafter. There are a few surviving buildings, and some of them were rebuilt using brick. So in 1920, when liquor was outlawed by the government, it created the black market. So what these folks did is they went underground because of all the abandoned coal mines, or they went deep into the woods and they started producing their own liquor. So New Straitsville, or Perry County, that's a pretty long distance away from New York and Chicago. So how did it get there? Well, there was a very simple reason. Back then, everything was connected by rail, the Hocking Valley Railroad, which my great-grandfather worked on the Hocking Valley Railroad, lived just outside of New Straitsville. This is his actual train set from 1956. This is an American Flyer. That's the last year they made this. I don't know exactly how old this is, but it was in my father's closet. So now it's here on display at Hocking Hills Moonshine. My great-grandfather, Bryant Venata, was a World War I veteran, and he worked on the railroad over in France. So when he came back to the States, he got a job with the railroad, and that's where he retired. So the story goes, this coal train had to go up north because with the rich coal seams of this area, the coal was loaded into the train cars and it was hauled up north. North is where all the factories were, where the refineries were, so they needed that to heat their furnaces for their factory. So a lot of it went to Toledo and Cleveland, but most importantly, it hit the shores of Lake Erie. And once it was placed on ships, it was transported into Chicago and New York and even international. So a lot of library books, as it goes, was shipped up north as cargo. So they had their own network to get it to the cities. Now once the product hit places such as Chicago, the story goes the Chicagoans created the name Straitsville Special, because once that product got to its destination, it was so much better than everything that was on the market. Just tasted better. They got top dollar for it. It truly was top shelf moonshine liquor. So a lot of history dates back to New Straitsville, where we were so proud of our heritage that we even placed the moonshine jugs on our police patches. As you can see there, New Straitsville, Ohio Police Department, and there's the moonshine jug. And this was my uniform from 1992. So that is also here on display at the Hocking Hills Moonshine. So not only do you come in here and you can do a tour and a tasting, but you can also check out some of the items that we have here on display. And there's a lot more to talk about, and we'll talk about that later.